But if someone like me might struggle to penetrate the structure, didn't get necessarily, the best advice on, what to do, what not, and so on and so forth, I think some people might experience the same challenge with a much stronger adversity than I have. The key thing is to understand and diagnose the various skills that you need for a particular occupation, and try to read yourself to know whether you're good or not and where to invest. Don't be a one-trick pony. So don't be just a doctrinalist. Be ready to do more, be a bit normative, try to do some normative papers. The big progresses in science do not generally originate from a monoculture of scientific specialization. I think I was too shy. Don't hesitate to force it. You won't be looked at badly, especially in the academia we live in now, where you really have to stand and show your work.
Welcome to a new episode of 10+1 Questions, Real Life in Academia. A talk show in which we ask established scholars about their careers, the best pieces of advice they have received, and tips and tricks to better navigate the academic world. Our guest today is Nicolas Petit. Nicolas is a full professor and joint chair in competition law at the European University Institute in Florence. He's also an invited professor at the College of Europe in Bruges. Nicolas holds a PhD from the University of Liège, an LLM from the College of Europe in Bruges, and a master's degree from the University of Paris too. Prior to joining the EUI, he held a public office position as a part-time judge with the Belgian Competition Authority and has worked in private practice with a leading US law firm in Brussels. In his research, Nicolas focuses on antitrust law, intellectual property, and law in the context of technological change. His research has appeared in numerous journals, including the Antitrust Law Journal, the European Law Review, the Review of Industrial Organization, and the Fordham Intellectual Property, Media, and Entertainment Law Journal. He is the co-author of the book EU Competition Law and Economics and author of Droit européen de la concurrence, a monograph which was awarded the prize for the best law book of the year at the Constitutional Court in France. More recently, he authored the book Big Tech and the Digital Economy, the Oligopoly Scenario, which is highly recommended by Sophia and me. Now, what is probably lesser known about Nicolas is that he's a marathon runner, has a passion for motorbikes, and, before his move to Italy, played the bass guitar in a rock band. Welcome, Nicolas. It is a great pleasure and honor to have you on our show. Since our show is called 10+1 Questions, Real Life in Academia, let's go right into it.
So I'd like to start with question 1. Given the choice of anyone in the world, whom would you take on a long road trip around the world, or say something like the Trans-Siberian Express?
So one person that interests me and I would love to spend time with is this serial entrepreneur named Mark Andreessen. He's the founder of the company Netscape, which was, as you remember, in trouble with Microsoft back in the day in the browsers wars. And he created this browser, Mosaic, which then became Netscape Communicator. But what's fascinating about Andreessen is that he kept creating businesses in a way with vision, in a way which is completely abnormal, even by American standards. And he's looked in his field as the most prolific entrepreneurs probably that there is. And I would love to see how a person like that operates, the kind of thick skin or not, a person that he is. And also, Andreessen has this thing which is distinctive compared to maybe other entrepreneurs who are always in the very rapid daily clock of things, and so he has this. He often writes papers where he gives a vision for the future. Like he wrote this piece called titled "Software is Eating the World," and then he had a piece on building a few months ago, and so he's one of these few entrepreneurs who can articulate a vision for the future. So there's more to it than just building businesses and changing and transforming. Is interesting. I'm not sure, I would get along well, and the people in the Silicon Valley have a very competitive and ruthless way to be. And I don't know if I would like that on a long trip, but that would be my answer.
I think that's a very interesting choice. I mean, for the viewers and listeners who are a bit younger, they might not remember the Netscape era, but I think we know and recall this quite well. And this guy obviously had to deal with a lot of setbacks, right? As you said, the tussles and the wars with Microsoft and the cases around this. So I'm quite sure this would be very, very impressive, and also perhaps like ask him a bit more how he sees or perceives the future, right? To what extent he thinks specific, perhaps also in your field, the tech giants will further develop, or the ecosystem will further develop.
That's right, and I mean, maybe it's a bit like anthropological, because it's like, okay, you want to go on a trip to study someone, but I'm just a curious person, and the nice thing about meeting new people is getting to understand that person, who he or she is, and I'm always interested in meeting new people. And for some reason, it feels that maybe we have less of this sort of extreme entrepreneur figure in Europe than they have in the United States, and it would both fascinate me as a professional interested in the study of innovation and entrepreneurship, but it will also fascinate me as a person, because as you said, Volker has been through a lot of setbacks and is changed, is pivoted. And I think this is one of the major qualities that I would like to have as a person, and that I try to work on, is this ability to move and pivot and change. And it seems to me that Andreessen has this thing hardwired.
So when you take the train, you probably, especially such a long trip as a Trans-Siberian Express, you probably need to take some books to read along. So I'd like to take the next question to the world of literature. So if you would have to choose 5 books that in your opinion, and this could be either fiction or nonfiction, that in your opinion, any young scholar or law and economics scholar should read, what would these books be?
I would definitely advise reading of 1984 and Animal Farm from George Orwell. And to me, the two of them are just the same book. One is a metaphor and the other is an anticipation. But both books embed the same representation of an evil society, which is not so evil, because in a way it's just an allegory for something that was happening and that was nurturing in the world. Then I would go for The World of Yesterday from Stefan Zweig, because, and this is the European heart that speaks here. This book is a great way to remember the state of Europe when it slowly but surely descended into World War I and World War II. Then there's a part 2 of, so not the full book, so that's why maybe I can do 6, because that's just one part. It's part 2 of Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy from Joseph Schumpeter. which is to me the best description about the dominant features of the capitalist system as exists, rather than other descriptions that we hear a lot these days, that capitalism would be a machine made to create class struggles by design. Then I would go for the antitrust paradox from Robert Bork. So that's for the Competition lawyers. So I have extreme reservations with a lot of the normative assumptions and conclusions that Bork reaches in the book. And I also have a lot of reservations about the logical treatments, often the sophistry of some statements that you find in Bork's book. But it's a beautiful example of what a lawyer can achieve in terms of, impacts on policymaking, one, but also it's extremely well written. I mean, no one can take away from Bork that he was such a powerful writer. So I think any wannabe antitrust scholar in the future should read that as a counterexample to some extent, as a source of inspiration as well, because he said some, really perplexing things, and it made us rethink. So there's a lot of, interesting and sound arguments in the book too. Okay, then I would go, and I'll be shorter on these ones. Then I would read a book, short book called Who Moved My Cheese from Spencer Johnson. It's a fable about two mices, and it's about how to change when someone takes away what's in your life, cheese. And it's a book about, how to live a life how to live the life in a way where you're resilient to transformation, you're embracing transformation, and it's a great short book. And then one last is a book that was recommended to me by the dean of the law school when I did this stint in Australia at the University of South Australia. And the dean on my first day was in her office, and it was a very pleasant meeting. And I sit there, I don't know Australia much. And the first thing she tells me is, look at the shelf and take this book. So I go, I take the book and say, okay, so there's there's really no set of guidelines at the law school, but there's one rule that we apply by the book. It's called the no hassle rule. And it's actually all explained in a book from a scholar called Robert Sutton, the no hassle rule. And it's about basically this thing that we all know, that all organizations have in more or less high quantity some toxic people, and that you don't want to deal with the toxic people. And there's a way to recognize them, and there's a way to handle the problem. And so she said, we apply that rule. And so I read the book, and it helped me understand my environment, and I think it's just a great wisdom.
Thank you very much for the list. I must say I know most of the books that you mentioned, and to be honest, I actually at the very beginning of my career I practiced antitrust law still back in Portugal, and actually the book that inspired me to start doing antitrust was actually Bork with Antitrust Paradox. I found it fascinating also because of the way it's written in, so it was actually also very inspiring to me.
So the last two books, if I recall correctly, were referring to how to deal with issues, problems, setbacks. And so connecting to this, and I think these issues are very important for the younger audience, right? The younger scholars. So if I may ask, what was the greatest challenge, Nicolas, you had to overcome in your career?
I have to say, I've been quite fortunate in my professional career. I didn't have many setbacks. I tried to work hard, and so far it's the outcomes from the work that I invested have been good, and I never felt that I had a big setback. I mean, it's, you have disappointments, but that happens. Oftentimes it feels like in my own country, I struggle to have impact. I'm not in the structure of the country at all. My career is completely tangential and parallel to what people achieve in France. But most of my family is in France. I keep listening and hearing about French politics. I'm interested in what's happening in the country. And I have virtually zero impact there. I have a book in French which sells well there in law schools. And so I often find that funny. And that's where I think, as part of maybe a deeper reflection, that's where you can see, if someone like me struggles to penetrate the structure, I think a lot of people who don't have the positional advantages that I have, and again, I don't come from what I would call a poor environment, nor a wealthy environment, just a middle class environment. But if someone like me might struggle to penetrate the structure, didn't get necessarily the best advice on what to do, what not, and so on and so forth, understand what someone from a less wealthy environment might struggle to achieve in a country like France. And again, I'm sorry, but I guess the same kinds of structures affect the system in Italy, the country I'm in now, or other countries in Europe. And so that's, this idea keeps me, I keep thinking about the sort of, to your question, the sort of challenges I had to overcome in my career in terms of, it was not a challenge really, because, I'm very happy where I am and I like my job a ton. But I think some people might experience the same challenge with a much stronger adversity than I have.
There are challenges along the path. It's not this single biggest obstacle, right? But it's to what extent you basically are endowed with knowledge, with advice, or embedded in an environment that basically facilitates it, right? Or whether you have to find your own way. I think we can, Sophia and we can also, I think, identify with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons why we also designed this talk show is because we also want to pass some of the tips and tricks to younger scholars and also students who might not have the privilege to actually receive information and be advised as to what to do next. But also, there are also so many small things. For example, if you come from a well-educated family, there are books that you naturally read because they are just there. And it's actually empirically proven that if your parents have a lot of books at home, you will read more. But if you don't have that, you will definitely have a disadvantage. And I mean, I definitely think it's important for for us. Also, I also try to pass that along to students. I also try to do my share of mentoring of younger students who come from underprivileged backgrounds. And I must say that in the Netherlands, you don't have the class problem that you have in France, that you have in Italy, that you have in Portugal, where I come from. I think in the Netherlands, you have more egalitarian society. So even if you come from an underprivileged background, it might be difficult to get to university because of, especially if your parents don't speak Dutch at home. But I still think from a financial perspective, you will make it because there is a very strong welfare state. But then there will be other things like, for example, how you introduce yourself at an interview, how you present yourself, how you write, especially in law. I mean, it's very important to be polished, how you show up dressed for an interview, right? I mean, all these small details are things that if you come from a very elitarian background, you will know because your father or your mother will tell you, put on a tie, don't do this, don't do that. But if you don't come from that kind of background, you will create a bad impression just by walking into the room. And these are just small things that actually matter. And I unfortunately have heard from very good students who didn't make it at law firms, very big law firms, because of these kind of small details, or because they are told, oh, you seem smart, but the way you talk, it's as if you were in a bar. And we don't want people to talk like that to our clients. So all these things, I think it's very, they're very important. So I'd like to go to our next question that actually also has to deal a little bit with cultural changes and changing countries. So this is a question that was actually proposed by one of our previous guests, Professor Pinar Oskar from Oxford. So like her, you have lived in different countries. You were born in France, and then you have lived and worked, among others, in Belgium, United States, Australia, and Italy. And there are always so many challenges when you move from one country to another. I can speak, just from just my own experience. And I believe there is the risk of permanently feeling like you're an immigrant. So how do you make each place feel like home?
Okay, so that's a good question. So I think there's two ways to do that. So one is to try to bring a bit of your home in the country where you are. Okay. That's not my strategy. The other is to try to make the country where you are become your home, right? And I think I'm more in the sort of second school. Now, my experience with this is one easy way to, or maybe not easy, but one of the interesting ways to penetrate a country that's not yours is to learn the politics of the country, and to learn about the political discussion, the political question in the country. And, people may say that they hate politics. Everyone, even someone who says, I hate politics, really likes it because politics makes people tickle and react. So it tells a lot about the people, and it's a very easy way to interact with people, to talk a little bit about the politics, ask them about their political system.
But I think that's actually a good point. I think getting to know the politics really helps integration, and also definitely being able to claim, well, I'm also a citizen. And of course, with Belgium, you don't have the language obstacle. There is, of course, an accent difference, but the language is still the same. So that's you always have that advantage, I would say.
When we connect to the first four questions, we discussed about challenges, we discussed the recommended reads, the literature, and like how you ideally make, say, the place you move to your home quite quickly, how you adapt ideally. In all these situations, perhaps it's important to have somebody who provides support. So my question would be, Nicolas, what is the best piece of advice someone has given to you?
So I was told when I worked in this law firm in Brussels by the managing partner, I was told that to be good at something, you need to master several skill sets. And the managing partner said, in a law firm, if you want to be a good lawyer in a law firm, you need to be good at writing. You need to be good at speaking. You need to be good at bringing some business in. So you need to be a good seller. And you need to be a good manager, because you're going to have a team. So the human resources thing. And he said, most people are good at some, but not all of that. He said that, and he said, the key thing is to understand and diagnose the various skills that you need for a particular occupation, and try to read yourself to know whether you're good or not and where to invest. It's a sure thing that you will never necessarily be great at all of them, but try to work a little bit on the ones that are the weak spots, right? But not keep losing sight of the others, of course, right? So to zoom in on one of them, the writing one, for instance, my writing skills have progressed a lot when I went to this law firm. I would actually advise a lot of young scholars or young students to spend some time in a law firm, even if they don't like the idea of legal practice, because lawyers who do the practical work generally tend to write very well. You are trained to write in a very clear and logical way. And this is, I can see sometimes missing with people who didn't have this training. Now, one thing that helped a lot, a very practical tip on writing, and that's again a lawyer from this law firm who became a friend, one of the best lawyers I know, Miguel Rato. He told me, pick up 3 or 5 papers that you really like. So if you're an academic, take 3 or 5 papers that you really like. The style. Remember what I said about Bork, right? And look at them, but don't really focus on the content. Focus on the elements of style. Try to read the structure of the book as if you were an engineer and you were not looking at the building, but the underlying blueprint, right? So, short or long sentences, the flow of the argument, the way the arguments are constructed, whether it's more in the pushback style or in the affirmation style, the way the titles are constructed. It's all these things. It's sort of our architecture of language, not substance. And when you find an expression or a construction of sentence that you like, write it down in a book, right? You can use them. So I did that, and it was very helpful. And I keep doing this when I fall on a paper that I really like, style-wise. I keep it. I'm like, okay, I'll return to that when I write my next paper because I like this architectural design of the paper. And so to lawyers and young students and researchers who struggle to find their style, it takes a lot of time. That's probably one of the best pieces of advice I ever had.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. I think this was super great advice and highly valuable.
So Nicolas, we already talked about a number of issues regarding the different tool sets that we have to have as academics. And I think one of them is definitely the ability to supervise PhD students, and especially at TUI. That is a very important part of the position, I would imagine. And I believe supervising PhD students at this time with the pandemic, it is quite challenging, I would say. So we were wondering, what kind of supervisor are you? And what have you learned so far from supervising PhD students?
I've always maybe acted on the intuition or perception that there was no one-size-fits-all model for PhD supervision. And it's a very bilateral relationship that you establish every time with your researcher. So I don't have much of a format or a path. It's an emergent process, and that's the way I approach it. As maybe I said before, I think what I try to do is to give time, so that I do, and try to be responsive. And it's important here because we have a very structured PhD program at the UI. And my experience with PhD researchers until now has often been, this is a typical way legal researchers approach research problems. They grasp knowledge, they throw it on the table, and then they try to build a framework around it. So that's useful, but I don't think that's what researchers should, in the end, always try to do. Often this sole inquiry dominates the entire PhD process, and I'm not sure that this is the only thing that legal researchers can give to science. I think we can give more. The second thing is that young scholars, especially the youngest ones, they're often obsessed with methodology because they hear that they need a methodology. And I think that's not, it's not that it's a wrong thing to do, but it's probably the wrong thing to do at the very early stages of your PhD. I think what's important is to start from the right end, which is to read knowledge, get knowledge, generate insights so as to generate intuitions. Once you have an intuition, you can start to think of a test, and then that's where the methodology question comes. Often when I talk to researchers, I say, okay, but explain to me, what is the question you're trying to answer? And very few young researchers manage to give a reply to that question. What is the question you're trying to answer? Formulate a question. So, I think the work in the early stages of a PhD is really about that. It's really about trying to elicit from the PhD researcher, who often has it, but it's deep inside, elicit this question. And yeah, so maybe, yeah, these are, I think, the two things I learned on the road.
But Nicolas, if I may follow up on this answer. So when you start supervising a PhD, especially at the very beginning, would you consider yourself as the kind of supervisor who just gives freedom to the PhD, or do you try to be a little bit more, or do you try to guide the PhD a little bit more? Because there are different sizes of supervision. You said you don't believe in one size fits all. But if you have to choose, are you the kind of PhD supervisor who returned a paper with lots of track changes and comments and everything you read, or are you rather the person who says like, no, I'll just give you some guidelines and then you have to sort out?
I would say that I'm give a lot of freedom on substance. Researchers can work on the subjects they like and the topics and sub-themes that they really enjoy. So I would not really question that. And I would just play along with them. In terms of structure and form, I'm more heavy-handed. So I would edit significantly what I receive to provide some elements of structure, logic, and style as well. I am of the school who believes that writing is thinking. So when I read a text that's poorly written, I often infer that the thinking is not clear, right? Or that there's a margin for progression in the thinking. So it's not just a style, it's just, the ultimate test of whether your thoughts are clear and logical is to put them to paper. It's very easy to talk about issues. And because when you talk, you're not constrained by, you're not 100% constrained by logic. In the talking, you can tolerate some inaccuracy. But on paper, it's intolerable because you see it with your eyes, right? This realization that there's something illogical is intolerable when you read it. Whereas in the flow of the talking, it goes away, right? Words on paper matter more, and logic on paper matters more than words and logic in speaking. Maybe I want to add something. So there's one thing on which I'm pretty uncompromising, which is that I don't like ideology in general. I don't like it. I'm always very suspicious when people come with a catalog of normative prescriptions about things. So when someone comes with ideological priors, when someone comes to me, and that happens sometimes with researchers, I ask them to fight stronger against their ideology. So if you come to me with ideological priors, I expect from you that you give a bigger chance than normal to the contrary hypothesis.
So my question would be like, focusing now on you again, do you have academic role models, or do you have somebody in academia who has inspired you and keeps inspiring you?
Again, that's a hard question. So my PhD supervisor, Damien Girardin, was a great source of learning, and he really motivated me in the early days of my PhD to try new things, and he learned me a lot of stuff. So I have a lot of gratitude for that. But then I don't really have a role model in academia. I think there's people I never met, but I like what they did. I like to read about their path and their career and the way they operated and positioned themselves. So René Joliet was a judge at the European Court of Justice. He was my predecessor in Liège. He was teaching competition law and European law. So I've been reading a lot about him and what he wrote. He didn't write much, but he was one of the first scholars in European law to write books in English. He went to America to study US antitrust law. He has 2 books on US and EU antitrust law. And the books are still very modern today. And he was also one of these scholars who didn't shy away from talking truth to power, not only private power, but also public institutions. So, to these days, it's like making impacts and, pleasing the policymakers. And a lot of people in academia, unfortunately, because there are incentives to be policy relevant, this means that you need to some extent follow with the flow with the policy structure. And Joliet was completely uncompromising. And I always thought that this is the right way to approach things. We're not here to, as academics, we're not here to please anyone. We are here to, the job that we've been assigned to is to speak our minds on the basis of reason and evidence. That's maybe the methodological boundary that I set to myself. Speak our mind on the basis of reason and evidence, not ideology. And when it disappoints or frustrates or makes someone unhappy, too bad. But this is the mission that we have for society.
I think that was very insightful and very powerful too, and very true, of course, in many respects, and also showed to what extent you, of course, were influenced by or inspired by, one can say, academic mentors and role models.
So Nicolas, you already mentioned that one of your role models at the law firm actually defined a set of skills that a lawyer should have. So writing well, speaking well, being able to attract business. But now in academia, I believe we also have to attract grants, at least in some countries, but we also have to deal with different kinds of different kinds of needs and demands. So my question for you would be, what are, in your opinion, the 3 most important qualities that a good scholar should have?
The number one quality, the number one feature or property is passion. When people lose passion for research in research institutions, they tend to take power positions. I think there's a way to cultivate passion. And the way I do it myself is to work on a portfolio of subjects. So when you're bored, you can turn to something else. And keeping the passion alive, the second thing about keeping the passion alive is to be ready to kill some projects. So not be stuck in something which displeases you. The second thing is learning. I think you need to be ready to learn. So you need to be open-minded and ready to assume that you don't know everything. Okay. So this is the thing about being certain or being uncertain. I like to think of myself as being someone uncertain about the state of affairs. The way I solve this problem of certainty, or I try to move away a little bit from uncertainty, is to be conciliant, which is to explore what other sciences have to say. So I go read what people in other fields write. I read probably less law than what people write in other fields. And the reason for that, it's not just because I like it, but if you think about science and technology and science, most scientific progress is combinatorial. It's not about people in physics doing only physics. It's not about economists just doing economics. The big progresses in science do not generally originate from a monoculture of scientific specialization. And if I think about, for instance, someone like Ronald Coase, who was very influential on me, Coase was an economist who did legal work. He worked on cases and rules. And so, I would love to, I work the other way around, which is to look at economics. And that's a bit what I try to do in my book. The last one is fairly easy. Don't be a one-trick pony. So don't be just a doctrinalist. be ready to do more, be a bit normative, try to do some normative papers. Don't be a quant only. Also cultivate your qualitative research.
I would subscribe to that, Nicolas, really. I think, and obviously, I think you practice this yourself, right? And the combinatorial thing is, I think, very nicely put. And I also believe in that, in the power of this, especially given that this is so hardly to disentangle, right? Especially the integration of the physical and the virtual world and so on. Now, when we come back again to your academic career, your experience, I think one question that is relevant or would be very interesting to know about for our younger viewers is, do you have any academic regrets? So is there a book or an article you didn't end up writing, an article that was rejected and you didn't resubmit or anything like this?
Sir, not maybe regrets about papers that I didn't write or that I left on the back burner. There's a bunch of them, sometimes with co-authors, and I'm sorry if I was the one dropping the pen here. One regret that I may have is I might have been too shy when I was a young scholar. And so, for instance, I had this opportunity to go to Harvard University as a research fellow. I think I was too shy, I was too French in a way, I had been in this French educational environment where you have to be subservient to the big academics, and you always have to pay respects, and so and in America it doesn't work like that. In America, they like people who take initiative and who are very risk-taking and so on. So I was too shy when I went there. I didn't make the most of it. I didn't attend many things that the campus had to offer. And when I think about it, I say, oh, I had this opportunity. I should have stayed longer. I should have met more people. And so if like me, some people who listen to the show come from these cultural environments, cultural university environments, I'm sure Sophia, coming from Portugal, probably has experienced the same kind of things in her career. If you come from this environment and you're a young scholar and you're naturally a bit behind in terms of how you pitch yourself and stuff, don't hesitate to force it. You won't be looked at badly, especially in the academia we live in now, where you really have to stand and show your work.
So Nicolas, you just published a very innovative book that has been very well received. We're not going to ask you to give a book talk because we believe that you have given too many book talks so far, and you're probably already thinking of the next projects. So what is next for you?
Yeah, thank you. It's true that I had enough. I have enough of these book talks, and I'm very happy that the book was well received. Again, I didn't write the book to really make impact, but I wrote the book so that to make a direct impact on policy. But I think the book has some ideas in it, which I would like to draw on in the future. But for the moment, I'm not really working on that. So I have 3 papers in my mind that I want to write and that I'm starting to write. Okay, so the first paper is a paper that I call for the moment Asimov for lawyers. So it's science fiction, has a lot of insights to provide to lawyers in all fields, and I'm writing on that. The other paper that I have in mind is something about what people in business and management science call dynamic capabilities. And so this paper on dynamic capabilities is trying to draw on works from people like David Teese to maybe change the software of Kantian theory to a more biological, evolutive, and transformative theory of the business enterprise. And the third paper is something more traditional, more doctrinal. So I'm trying to write a paper. It's a long-term project on methods of judicial interpretation in US and EU antitrust law.
So thank you very much for giving us some insights into your next projects. And we have asked you 20 questions, and talk show is called 10+1 questions, because we always ask our guests to formulate the question that they have always wanted to ask a fellow academic, or a question that you have always wanted to be asked, but no one did. So what is your +1 question, Nicolas?
Yeah, I know what I would like to ask to any academic, and what, you know, maybe people would ask me, I know is what are you trying to achieve by working so hard?
Nicolas, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.
Thanks to you, Sophia and Volker. I actually learned a lot from talking to you and sharing these experiences in the past weeks and today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.